you guys for being here. If we haven't met before, my name is Colin. I'm the pastor here at Branches, and it's just our honor and joy to welcome you to this place. Someone just told us this week, and Michelle said it in her sermon last week, which I did not ask her to do, which is there are a lot of options in Houston, and so it's just a gift to us that you chose to be with us today here at Branches. So thank you so much for being here. We're in the middle of a series, or at the end of a series rather, called Junk Drawer Jesus. And the premise of this series is that we all have a junk drawer. Don't lie, you got one somewhere. Maybe it's a junk cabinet, something like that. It's filled with stuff that you don't really need anymore. And the same is true of our spiritual lives, that we kind of gather these things up along the course of our life, that we believe things about God, or about the church, or about one another, or about the world, and then we kind of discover over time, like, actually, I don't know why I'm carrying this around, or certainly moving house to house with this stuff. It's good for us to kind of let it go. And so we're ending the series today to talk about the church, with a capital C, the ideas we have about this gathering and the organization of the church, and the church universal all over the world that celebrates today at the table and in sermons and in prayers and songs they sing together. What's the church for? And are there any ideas about church that we're carrying around that we could, together, in a fun way, like when the shredder truck comes to a business, get rid of some of that stuff, and we will joyfully, gleefully do it together. So we're glad that you're here as we conclude that series today. Also just want to let you know, invite you back next week for the series that we're having in July called Playlist. So we love music here, big fans personally. And so we wanted to talk about songs that maybe we hear in our day-to-day, maybe songs from our past, and take a lens on them and see where God might be speaking to us through them. What lessons spiritually we can learn from listening to music. Kind of open our eyes in a new way to hear God's voice through things we wouldn't typically hear God's voice through. We kind of make this, I think, faulty distinction between secular and sacred music. But the beauty of art and the gift of music is that God can speak through it and does speak through it in a variety of ways. So Lizzie McAlpine and Brandy Carlisle and Mumford and Sons and Reliant K, for sure. We'll hear all of those and get to play some fun music and get to listen for God's voice in all of it. So I want to invite you back next week for the beginning of that series. And then we'll conclude that series with a special time of worship here at Branches on that fifth Sunday, where we can sing together and just celebrate the way that God is speaking to us through all sorts of stuff like that. In this series, Junk Drawer Jesus, I kind of was thinking this week, okay, like, what's the concluding word? Like, what's the one way to wrap up all the things we've talked about over the past several weeks? And really, from the very beginning, to talk about ideas about who God is, and then what it means to be saved, and what it means to kind of be in a relationship with the world, as Michelle talked about last week. Like, what are we really saying? And really, I think when we unpack this stuff, when we examine it and see if it sparks joy in us or whether we could get rid of it, we're wondering if it's really truly should be part of our story. Should it be part of our DNA? Should it be something we hold on to and re-communicate over and over again and say, this is emblematic of who we are as a people collectively? It's truly us examining our family story. We're looking at the kind of commemorative stuff we keep in a shoebox, or the pictures, or the papers, or the records that we keep in a drawer somewhere, and wondering, is this really what I want to be part of my story? We all have one. And we think, too, about these qualities across our family from generation to generation, or even in the present generation, the qualities that all of our families share. I was talking with Landon about it. We were saying, like, my mom's side of the family, the Gambles, they're all very different, but they're all very loud. So their family gatherings are loud. And they would all say yes. They'd all shout yes whenever we're very loud. My dad's side of the family, all very different, and they're all really good storytellers. Really wonderful storytellers. And again, all really, really different, but all can tell a story, and probably too long of a story. The sorts of people, like what time it is, and they tell you how to build a watch. Those sort of people. They got long stories, really good. They love a good punchline, too. Landon and I were thinking about, like, our own family legacy, like, what do we want people to know us for? We thought back to our, like, marriage vows, and it's really important to us as a couple that we think each other is funny. Landon is truly one of the funniest people I know, the funniest person I know. So, like, that's the legacy we want to leave. The jury's still out on whether other people think that about us, but that's the story we want to leave behind. Like, yeah, those Bagby, they're all very different, but they are funny. And I hate to do this to put you on the spot, but I wonder, like, your family of the past or your current family, like, what's one of those traits? You're like, we're all very different, but we all have this trait. Just saying that for me. Or if you're sitting next to them, I don't want to say this. Passionate. Andrea, that is correct. Yes. Yeah. Stubborn. Passionate and stubborn. Match made in heaven. Wonderful. Anxious, yeah. Optimistic. Love that, Rob. Yes, I see that in all of y'all. What was that? Loving. Yes, that's a great trait to pass on. I think that's true too, John Stones. Resourceful. Love that, Stacy. Thank you. Crafty. Yes. Curious. Love that, Kalel. That's a great one too. Yeah, so we can all think of these qualities, and some of you named some shadow side ones, and you're like, I'm not going to yell this out at church. But we all have a family story, and we all have a family trait. I think about like young adult and children's literature. They try to make this really clear. Like the Weasleys, they're all different, but they're all hospitable and warm in their own way. And then the Malfoys, they're the bad ones, you know? They're the bad guys, that they're kind of like conniving or whatever, plotting sort of people. Or I think about the Banks family in Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. They're all kind of sophisticated and fancy at some level. That actually provides the foundation for a lot of the comedy that happens in that show. Or you think about the Gilmore Girls or something like that. They're all like fast-talking, kind of witty, in-your-face people. We all have a family story like that. And beyond just our like immediate family or the family we grew up with or our ancestral generational family or the family that we're creating together, maybe in an organization or a workplace, you kind of maybe talk about it, though sometimes it's kind of a red flag, that this is what our family as a workplace is about, or this is what our family as an organization or group is about. I thought of Horst Schulze. He's the founder of the Ritz-Carlton hotel chain. And he was really all about these like common values that they all share. Every employee, every sort of person, from the higher ups to the kind of middle management people, they all have the same values. And he wrote this great book called Excellence Wins. And I really encourage you to read it because he talks about these kind of common shared values they share at the Ritz-Carlton, from the facilities, custodial staff, all the way up to the top person. I'm gonna read some of these values. It begins with a headline, I am proud to be Ritz-Carlton. So they have this sense of pride. And they have this sense of pride because they have these common shared values, like loud or passionate or anxious, but in a professional way. One, I build strong relationships and create Ritz-Carlton guests for life. That they have this kind of passion that when somebody comes to their hotel for the first time, they want to create by their behavior returning customers. I'm always responsive to the expressed and unexpressed wishes and needs of our guests. You see a need, you fill a need. I'm empowered to create unique, memorable, and personal experiences for our guests. I understand my role in achieving the key success factors in embracing community footprints and creating the Ritz-Carlton mystique. A lot of insider language there. I continuously seek opportunities to innovate and improve the Ritz-Carlton experience. I own and immediately resolve guest problems. I create a work environment of teamwork and lateral service so that the needs of our guests and each other are met. I have the opportunity to continuously learn and grow. I'm involved in the planning of the work that affects me. I am proud of my professional appearance, language, and behavior. I protect the privacy and security of our guests, my fellow employees, and the company's confidential information and assets. And I'm responsible for uncompromising levels of cleanliness and creating a safe and accident-free environment. They're serious about the culture that they're trying to cultivate at the Ritz-Carlton. There's a story they always tell. He tells it in the book, Excellence Wins. I hear it at conferences all the time, that they often witness, again, a custodial staff or someone working on the lawn carrying a guest's bags into the hotel. They're like, everybody's responsibility is everybody's responsibility. And we certainly see this play out. They have high customer retention, high reviews, whatever else, but they're also aspirational. They don't hit the mark 100% of the time, every time. And in reading these again this morning, I was like, I wouldn't post these up in my house, I am proud to be a Bagby. Though I am, I'm not really interested in like the customer experience because I don't have a good or a service to offer other than to be, who we are, to be a good host or something like that. But again, in the same way, we all have real values that are expressed and aspirational values that we long for. What are the church's values? I don't mean this church or this family of churches, or I don't even necessarily mean a specific denomination, but when we talk about the church, when people are talking about Christians, when people who follow Jesus, what are their expressed and aspirational values? We sometimes survey people, and it may not surprise you, or it may be disheartening to know some of the values that are expressed. 21% of non-Christian people in this Barna survey say that they have a positive view of the church. 21%. So that means 79% have a negative view. Half of non-Christians don't trust pastors. It was obviously personally hard to hear, but also, for good reason, certainly. Millennials, it's always the millennials, think church is detached from real issues that people are facing. Expressed values, though the church, people who follow Jesus, have aspirational values. That's what we're talking about today in Paul's letter to the Corinthians, are these aspirational values. Certainly expressed in many ways over the course of Christian history, though by the account of this Barna survey, not always enacted perfectly. So we're in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, starting in verse 12. And this may be a familiar passage to you if you grew up in the church, about this body with different parts. It says this: "For just as the body is one and has many members, and all the members of the body, though many, are one body, so it is with Christ. For in the one Spirit we were all baptized into one body, Jews or Greeks, slaves or free, and we were all made to drink of one Spirit. Indeed, the body does not consist of one member, but of many. If the foot would say, 'Because I'm not a hand, I do not belong to the body,' that would not make it any less a part of the body. And if the ear would say, 'Because I'm not an eye, I do not belong to the body,' that would not make it any less a part of the body. But if the whole body were an eye, where would the hearing be? If the whole body were hearing, where would the sense of smell be? But as it is, God arranged the members in the body, each one of them as he chose. If all were a single member, where would the body be? As it is, there are many members, yet one body. The eye cannot say to the hand, 'I have no need of you,' nor again the head to the feet, 'I have no need of you.' On the contrary, the members of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable. And those members of the body that we think less honorable, we clothe with greater honor, and our less respectable members are treated with greater respect. Whereas our more respectable members do not need this. But God has so arranged the body, giving the greater honor to the inferior member, that there may be no dissension within the body, but the members may have the same care for one another. If one member suffers, all suffer together with it. If one member is honored, all rejoice together with it. Now you are the body of Christ and individually members of it. And God has appointed in the church first apostles, second prophets, third teachers, then deeds of power, then gifts of healing, forms of assistance, forms of leadership, various kinds of tongues. Are all apostles? Are all prophets? Are all teachers? Do all work miracles? Do all possess gifts of healing? Do all speak in tongues? Do all interpret? But strive for the greater gifts, and I will show you still a more excellent way." Friends, this is the word of God for us, the people of God. Thanks be to God. Like that list that Horst Schulze describes for his people at the Ritz-Carlton, so Paul, in a similar way, describes the variety of parts and members of a body. That there's one single governing head, it's Jesus, it's the Christ, and then there's a various degree of members. I was reading some early Christians like 2,000 years ago, how some early Christians like John Chrysostom and Augustine and Ambrose, some other people interpreted these passages, and they got really granular and deep, and I would say in the weeds. And they are long dead, so they're not here to hear me say that, but they would go really specific, and they'd be like, the hand is the service to the world, and the heart is the love and care that we have for the world, and even as specific as the spleen and other parts that are very specific about, that I won't say specifically out loud, that the early Christians were concerned with kind of divvying up each of these. What Paul gives broadly in this letter is to a diverse group of people. What we know about Corinth, the community that this letter was written to, is that it was a diverse port city, cosmopolitan, all sorts of people, all sorts of ideologies, all sorts of religions, all sorts of backgrounds and races and statuses. And that church in Corinth, this new burgeoning group of people who follow Jesus, their makeup was similar. People of high class and low class. People of low status and high status. People with one religious background or another religious background. You can just imagine all the different circumstances. And the picture that Paul paints is one that is still similarly diverse in gifts, also independent of one another in their gifts, and Christ-shaped. Like, as we've been doing over the course of these several weeks, we've been talking about things we want to throw out, but Paul gives some advice of things not to throw out. Here's again what he says in chapter 12, in verse 21 and in verse 27. And first he says, "The eye cannot say to the hand, I have no need of you, nor again the head to the feet, I have no need of you." There's like, there must be something going on in this community where it's saying, okay, you don't have this gift, so you're not as important, or we actually don't need you. Or in verse 27, now you are the body of Christ and individually members of it. Paul emphasizes the fact that there are different gifts and different embodiments of what it means to follow Jesus, and you're throwing out the wrong thing. What's Paul's intention then for the Corinthians, and then likewise for us? How can we harness this idea that, yeah, of course, we come from a variety of backgrounds. We live in one of the most diverse cities in America. We all have a different perspective on religion or politics, or from a different racial background, or we have a different status in society. How do we do this church thing together? And likewise, if we step forward, how do we do this church thing together so that non-Christians have a more positive view of us? That would be nice. Or more than half of non-Christians trust pastors. That may be a longer, harder road to tread. Or so the dang millennials will think that church is actually engaged with issues that people actually care about. What do we have to address? What do we have to see about ourselves and change so that our expressed values match our enacted and embodied values? First, this is what we hear a lot in the Western church in particular, is that it seems like church, especially the Sunday morning gathering, is all about performance. It's all about the appearance of holiness, or the appearance of religiosity, or the appearance of a worshipful, loving heart. And I realize I say this in front of an enormous LED screen and a very nice church building, that we do truly care about excellence in what we do in our worship. But as a means, not the end. And we put on a show, if you want to say it that way, as an expression of our love and our attention to Jesus. I was reading a story about a church called Oak Hills Church. It's in Folsom, California. And they were growing like crazy in the 80s and 90s. And it was just like Sunday after Sunday after Sunday. It was like, we have to make more room. We have to add another service. We have to put out more chairs. We have to have overflow, growing. And that's amazing performance and production. And then a meeting, a Monday after an especially explosive Sunday. They were talking about, okay, here's what we need to do for this next week, and here's how we can change this, and here's what we can do with this song, and here's how we make it look different like this. And the main production guy at Oak Hills Church said, yeah, this is awesome, but does anybody else feel like we could do this without Jesus? That, of course, crushed all the leadership of this church. And they began to see that, in fact, they many times were doing it without Jesus as the head, as the center point, and more about, again, doubling down in the performance and making it better week after week for the performance's sake. That we move from a performance-driven church to a participatory church. That people gather together not to be consumers of religious goods and services, but as participators in the worship and adoration and service to God. Second, self-help church. It's a great Billy Bob Thornton line in that movie about baseball. Its name escapes me right now. Whereas, like, why would you read self-help? Your self stinks. Self-help doesn't work because the self that you're trying to help isn't really good at helping itself. And self-help church, too, is really just like this kind of pop psychology idea. We kind of put it like Jesus could have paint on it. Like, you just try really, really hard and become a good and holier person. We move from a self-help church to a self-giving church. That's what Paul says when he says, when one member suffers, we all suffer together. And what he's trying to pinpoint is like when you see an inferior member of the body and they're being crushed by oppression, or being hurt or harmed, and they're pushed to the margins, that's hurting you unless you walk alongside them and lift them up out of it. We move from a self-help church to a self-giving church. And third, again, maybe a more specifically Western view of the church, is we move from an exclusive club. Michelle talked about this last week. We have this exclusivity, like we're in here and the world is out there. We move from exclusivity to a love-identified family. We sang about it today. This is how they'll know us, by our love. straight from the New Testament, that the identifying piece, Jesus says, that the people that follow him would be their love. St. Augustine said of this passage that really the church's job, the body that Paul is talking about, is to whet our appetites for love. Then we come to this gathering on Sunday morning, it's to make us hungry and thirsty for more love in the world, for more love in our lives and more love to share with other people, to whet our appetites for it. One family distinctive that I don't get because my family was not this way, this is a metaphor, by the way, I'm not prescribing this, is many of Landon's family members, no matter which family member they all kiss each other on the lips. And I know there are probably families represented here who also do that. Again, I'm not down on it, it's just not how I was raised. If I were to walk into a family gathering, I'm getting kind of chills thinking about it. With my family, the Bagby family, I started kissing them all on the lips. They'd be like, what is wrong with them? You know? It's just not something we do. But we know in the New Testament, yeah. God's judgment is like, kiss your family on the lips. Start today.
Start today.
The identifying factor of the New Testament church, of people who follow Jesus, was their very visible and public displays of affection. Not just physical affection, but we read outside observers on Christians like, they care for the orphans, they care for the widow, they care for the oppressed, and they lift up the lowly. Isn't that weird? Isn't that awful? But it was their defining trait and factor. Here's how we do this together. Here's how we become a people of love. So when Paul says at the end of this passage in verse 31, I will show you a more excellent way. You go into 1 Corinthians 13, and some of you may know this one. If you go to the end of chapter 12 and into 1 Corinthians 13, he describes what this more excellent way is. This is what he says. If I speak in the tongues of mortals and of angels but do not have love, so he's identifying what the more excellent way is. I'm a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal, and if I have prophetic powers, if I have all the gifts that I've just described and understand all mysteries and have all the knowledge, have all the right doctrine, all the right opinions, which we do, by the way, but I have no love, then I'm nothing. If I give away all my possessions and I hand over my body, if I'm self-sacrificial but I do not love the object of that affection, I gain nothing. And then cozy, we hear this at weddings. Love is patient, love is kind, love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. And then he goes on to say, all those other gifts, all those other things you should pursue in your life, those will pass away, but love will not. So make that the center point of your work together. Here's how we do that. First, discover, identify, and celebrate yours and your neighbor's gifts. It's a beautiful thing to identify in another. You have this gift and I don't. And you lift it up and you magnify it and you point to it and say, this person has this gift. And there's a variety of ways to do this. You can Google spiritual gifts inventory if you want to go the more spiritual route. And the UMC, the denomination we're a part of, they have a spiritual gifts inventory. Really helpful, even as a beginning point to identify the gifts that you have, that you're different from another. Or Strengths Finder, Gallup Strengths Finder, really, really good too. We talked about that several weeks ago. Like, there are many people who have woo. I don't have woo, but yes, Lauren Bayer has woo. I'm grateful for the woo. She's the woo, I'm not the woo. And so we celebrate the difference of gifts. We honor the overlooked. You have to just kind of step back. I often have to do this on Sunday morning. So much happens at branches, but also so much happens during the week that just happens, and it's not little fairies or goblins doing it. It's people in the church who make these things happen and make a difference in other people's lives. We're gathering socks and underwear and other clothing for the Mercy Closet at Gethsemane campus. And nobody writes their name on the gifts that they give. But if you see someone giving, if you see someone donating those things here, celebrate them and thank them. When we honor overlooked actions, we then create more overlooked actions. We create more, we breed more generosity and love and care. Commit to community. Being with other people, we'll say this all the time, there is no solitary Christian. We do this alongside one another. And it happens over the course of time. Time plus trust equals transformation. Over the course of time, in these love relationships with one another, things change, things happen. It becomes an identifying aspect of our community. And then, as always, we have to raise the question, if we start to have mission drift like Oak Hills Church in California did, or if something gets in the way, or we start to have a fight about something, we have to go back to the center and say, okay, who's in charge? As Paul says, there's one head. There's diverse parts. There's one body, however. There's one head. There's one whose whole mantra, whose whole life statement, whose whole life story spoke love to the world, who embodied this more excellent way, who said there's no greater love than this, what he was about to do, than to give his life for his friends. That's our leader. That's our center point. That's the kind of thinking and planning that's happening on top in the brain of this operation, is Jesus's. Dallas Willard said he thinks that Jesus was the smartest man who ever lived. Barring any other thunder, I think that's a correct opinion. And if that's true, if we believe that Jesus is the one that's going to show us how to be a loving people, to prove the world wrong, say, like, actually people who follow Jesus are centered on love, we point back to Jesus. And just to kind of boil it all down to one thing, to think about all those things we want to throw out, but maybe one thing we want to keep, is people who follow Jesus love on purpose. You can't accidentally love anyone. You can't kind of stumble your way into intentional, caring, generous love. You choose to love. And Jesus chose, if you didn't know this, to love you by giving himself for you, his life and his death. So let us choose purposefully, intentionally love. Amen.